right, well, thank you, Kathleen, and thank you to the committee that helped put all this together. And I mean that very sincerely, because this slide here of a collapsed bridge was in place, I don't know, 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, long before I knew what activity we were going to be doing, long before I heard of Bridges to Prosperity. So unbeknownst to me, you guys really set me up for success this afternoon. So sincerely, thank you. I really do appreciate it. And with that, I have a question. Does anyone recognize this particular scene? Okay, we have one immediate hand there. We have two, all right, a couple. So, and again, there's no prize, so you can all raise your hand if you want. But this is, for those of you who don't know or may not remember, this is the Fern Hollow Bridge in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania that collapsed earlier this year. January 28th, a little after 6:30 in the morning, this bridge, not even 50 years old, collapsed. Now, fortunately, there were no fatalities. There was a little bit of snow falling that morning, so there was a little less traffic, a lot of school delays, a little bit before rush hour. You can see there was a Port Authority bus, but there was only 2 passengers on it. So again, all in all, a pretty lucky situation for a pretty crappy situation. But there was one other thing that led to this being in the national headlines that you may have seen, other than the fact that bridges in America typically don't just collapse. It's the fact that President Biden was already scheduled to come to Pittsburgh that day to talk about infrastructure. How about that? Talk about luck, right? You're planning to come to talk about infrastructure, and what happens? A bridge collapses. So, as you would expect, he made a stop here before his planned remarks in a different spot in Pittsburgh. And he spoke with some people there on location, obviously had some remarks for the media, and then went on his way. But again, pretty big coincidence. Not for those of you, if you're into the conspiracy theories, obviously some of those popped up too, as you can imagine. But that being said, Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania generally, unfortunately, does have a lot of bridges that are in need of some repair. So clearly this is a surprise. You don't expect it. But at the end of the day, things like this happen when you allow your bridges to become not in tip-top shape, if you will. So all that being said, why was I planning to talk about bridges and start with a picture like this long before I knew how appropriate it was with at least, I don't want to point any fingers here, but there was at least 2 bridges that looked a lot like this at the end of the competition earlier today. And there's 3 reasons. So 3 reasons that I said, bridges kind of make sense. And, the first of which, again, even before I knew anything about the planned agenda, is the fact that, hey, this group, ECC, never heard of it until Kathleen said, hey, interested in talking? Yeah, sure, sounds good, makes sense. And again, it doesn't take long to figure out that a bridge is a very good representation of what all of us do here. You're talking about capital projects, engineering, that's captured in a bridge. Those of you who are engineers, there's a good chance early on in your college career you may have done some exercise with bridges because, again, it lets you talk about forces and use MATLAB or whatever else. So, again, a bridge seemed like a pretty logical thing for this particular group who, again, deals with capital projects, important projects that are very much mirrored in the idea of a bridge. So that was the first reason. The second reason is we're here talking about leadership, right? Future Leaders Program, leadership. And bridges are a pretty good analogy for leadership. In fact, I think you'd be hard-pressed to have a conversation last night or today and not hear the word bridge come up. We're a bridge. I'm a bridge between this and that. And that's all fine, albeit a bit overplayed. It can get a little overplayed, right? You hear about the bridges. We're a bridge here. We're connecting things. Yeah, it all makes sense on paper. But how often do you hear that term? So the second reason I'm here is, again, because it's about leadership, but as a related item, it's to make sure that you don't overuse this. You don't overuse some of these leadership things that you might hear at a conference like this, or you read in a book, or a podcast, or a blog, or some guru up on stage. I'm not a guru. I'm an engineer. I don't think engineer and guru really go together. So what? The warning for all of you that stems from the idea that bridges are very good parallels for leadership is that you all want to be differentiated leaders. You don't want to just be parroting the same things over and over again. They might be good things, there's valuable things, but if you're doing it unconsciously, you're going to limit yourself. You can talk about the classic joke, if you will, at least classic to me. You are all 1 in a million people. You are all special. Despite what Kevin said earlier when he said, no, you're not special, I do this for everybody. You're all special. You're 1 in a million. But with 8 billion people on the planet, that means there's 1,000 people, or 8,000 people just like you on planet Earth, right? So the reality is you do need to differentiate yourself, and you got to be cautious. You got to be conscious against overusing some of the leadership stuff, good as it might be. So again, long-winded reason for why bridges are the second reason that I wanted to do that. And to really hammer home this point, so if all of you say, you know what, we've heard enough of Joe, I'm going to tune out. To really hammer home this point, I have another question. Does anybody recognize this bridge? I know the name is there, right? The Kinzie Street Bridge. It's in Chicago, so I'm giving lots of hints here. But anyone know the significance of this bridge, at least in terms of making sure that you don't come across as a nauseating leader, somebody that's just parroting all the leadership things that I heard at a conference today? Anybody? Just show of hands. Anybody know? All right, well, what's that? Blues Brothers. It is a musical tie. Or, well, maybe there is a Blues Brothers reference that I'm not looking for. I'm looking for a nauseating reference. I'll take it. Yes, okay. It is the Dave Matthews Band thing. And I did, I don't know if anybody now knows what I'm talking about, but in 2004, one of the 5 tour buses for the Dave Matthews Band, which was in Chicago, the driver of one of those buses decided to discharge 800 pounds of human waste through the grate of the Kinzie Street Bridge. And for all of those of you who are involved in environmental things, okay, yeah, there's water below, that's not good. Well, there happened to be a tour boat underneath it, an open-air tour boat, and 2/3 of the people on that tour boat were soaked. I'm not even sure a drop of the human waste made it into the water below. It all wound up on that boat. And so again, I think we're far enough removed from lunch that I can share this here. I did ask one. I like to test these things out. So I did, with some caution, mention this to somebody at lunch, and they did know about it. And he's here in the room, and he's probably wondering, you still went through with that and made that reference? But again, I want to hammer home the fact that my goal today, my goal as a coach, is to help you all become differentiated leaders. Because many of us in this room, if not all of us in some way, support the commodity business, right? And what is a commodity? Well, if it's a molecule of methane, your molecule of methane is the same as your molecule of methane, all else being equal. Same barrel of oil, same properties here, there's the same value. And so too with you. There's a lot of people that might meet the same requirements as you, have a similar resume as you, but are you a differentiated leader? Or are you allowing yourself to be commoditized? So again, I believe strongly in this point, strongly enough to take the risk of kind of going down this path here, but I do that because it is important. And the third reason, finally, why I decided to make the beginning of this presentation all about bridges is because I'm coming to you from Pittsburgh, the city of bridges. And is there anyone here that happens to be, we got a couple, all right. So we have some Pittsburgh representation. You might want to leave. And I'll tell you why in a second. So you got about 2 minutes here until, all right, that's fine. So Pittsburgh, the city of bridges. And when President Biden came to the city of bridges there in January, he learned something. He learned that Pittsburgh has more bridges than any other city in the world. More than Venice. You have to say that point. It's very important if you're a Pittsburgher. More bridges than anywhere else in the world, including Venice. And he had never heard that. And when I heard him reference that on the scene, he was, again, talking to some reporters, and then he made the same comment later on, almost like, I can't believe this. Did you guys know this? I just learned this today. And I'm there listening, saying, how could a politician born in Pennsylvania, albeit on the other side of the state, you would want to endear yourself, we're obviously a toss-up state there, a swing state. How could he not know this? I know this. I'm not a native Pittsburgher, but I learned this about 10 years ago. I probably told dozens, if not hundreds of people, visitors, friends, hey, more bridges than anywhere in the world, including Venice. Well, guess what? It's not true. And I just learned this. Again, after I'd already decided to talk about bridges, I would have come down here and spread all of that misinformation, but it's not true. President Biden unconsciously was spreading fake news. I had been unconsciously spreading fake news. And again, you're coming back to leaders, the leader of the free world, the leader of at least myself, my family, whatever. But how many second, third degree impacts? How many people now believe this falsity that I think a good chunk of Pittsburghers. So if you already knew that, great. If you didn't, again, I apologize for bursting your bubble. We can talk later about that. But why? Why does that even matter? Long intro here, but why does it matter? Well, to emphasize the fact that President Biden, myself, unconsciously were having an impact, spreading misinformation. And again, relatively innocent misinformation, but nonetheless, we were spreading misinformation unconsciously. And so the point of today's talk is to help you avoid unconsciously damaging your reputation, your careers, your company, or something worse. And not in the 2022 version of canceling yourself by saying something stupid on social media, but in the sort of the slower, simmering leadership ways that we can push people away. We can unconsciously damage ourselves, damage our teams, damage our organizations. But with that, knowing that I'm in Houston, and we got about 70% of people here in Texas, I do need to point out that the city that does have the most bridges, at least by some measure, and as we learned with the exercise, there's a lot of, how could we put this? Confusion at times about how you measure whether a bridge is a certain length or whether it qualifies as a bridge or not, whether you're measuring the span or is it freestanding or whatever. But at least by the most objective measure out there, which is, I believe, at least a 20-foot span that is drivable, so some sort of roadway span. I'm not a bridge engineer, so if I'm messing up these words, that's okay. I rely on Wikipedia and other, on savory sources than that. But nevertheless, the city is Houston. So actually, Houston has about 2,300 bridges by this standard definition, about 6 or more times the number of bridges in Pittsburgh. Now again, coming back to Lance's exercise, which was excellently done, if people really wanted to pick and say, no, my bridge should have been number 1, there are some metrics there where if you want to tweak some things, Pittsburgh still comes out on top. But nevertheless, need to give a nod here to Houston. So again, we've set the stage, we're talking about bridges, we're building, no pun intended, upon some of the exercises today, the commentary about the Bridges for Prosperity, great program, wonderful. So what? I'm here in Houston. Why am I here in Houston? I'm happy to be here in Houston, but why? Why am I here today other than to come up here and give you some meaningless stats and gross you out about some story from the Dave Matthews Band from 2004 in Chicago? Well, I'm happy to be here for a couple of reasons. One, again, I serve the energy industry. That is my focus. That is my background. And what better place to be than Houston for that? While Pittsburgh, of course, we look at ourselves as the Saudi Arabia of natural gas, the reality is that Pennsylvania is still second to Texas in terms of natural gas. So again, it's be remiss not to say that I'm happy to be here in this energy hub, even if Pittsburgh has its moments up there. Another reason I'm happy to be here right now, and when I say right now, I mean right now. What is it, 2 o'clock? An hour after lunch? I'm happy to be here right now because I'm tasked with talking about consciousness. And what better time to talk about consciousness than at 2 o'clock on the heels of lunch? And so part of the goal today is to help arm you with tools that can boost your consciousness. And now after lunch, obviously there's the go-to tools like coffee, for example. There's indoor pyrotechnics, which unfortunately the safety committee said no to that, but it is effective when you can make that happen. But what are some of the other tools you can use? Kevin armed us with some tools earlier, and they are questions. The more questions you're asking, right, the more you keep people awake. You can call people out too, but that can get old after a while. But questions, asking good questions that makes people think. So I'm going to arm you today with a couple of questions. But with all that being said, we'll move on to the crux of the conversation here, which is Pittsburgh. We're going to come back to Pittsburgh for one more second because I want to make sure I place the blame appropriately where I learned where Pittsburgh had or didn't have the most number of bridges. It was on this duck boat tour, not this particular one, but duck boat tour about 10 years ago, best tour I've ever been on. I was on it twice. I told other people about it. The reason this picture's a little grainy is because it went out of business, probably for peddling misinformation. But that is where I learned about bridges. And this picture has some significance as we talk through things because in some ways it mirrors my career. And this is not going to be autobiographical, but in this picture, again, you have this boat coming out of the river onto dry land, much as I came from the offshore world in Gulf of Mexico up to Pittsburgh on dry land, and then ultimately spend 11 years in one of those office buildings back there. So as we get to the Q&A, we can talk about my journey. That's not terribly interesting. But as I went through that journey, one thing was present. I didn't realize it was present. But it was this sense of what was ultimately important. I didn't have a way to maybe quantify that or be focused on it, but a lot of those things that I look back in hindsight, I was very lucky. I was very lucky that I had good grounding. And again, as Keisha talked about, the importance of family and having an upbringing that allows you to see the world in a certain way and make better decisions. But since then, and now in this world of coaching, I have found in working with people that there are good quantifiable ways, some good ways to really measure how well you're doing and to help guide you. So again, my unconventional journey through the oil field or into the oil field even, again, conversation last night with some of you, you know that I'm from New Jersey. New Jersey is the only state in America, Oregon used to be there too, but only state where it's against the law to pump your own gas. So for me to wind up offshore in the Gulf of Mexico after school, coming from New Jersey, again, was never in the cards. Again, I have to pump my own gas. This was a foreign world to me. But unlike Kathleen, my grades weren't good enough to actually get a real chemical engineering job, so I met the requirements of being able to stay up for a day and a half straight. I didn't have any strings attached, no ties, no girlfriend, nothing else. And I was a prime candidate to, again, go work offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. Again, unconscious, perhaps. Lucky, definitely. But now, as I look back on that, I say, how might things have been different if I had some of these tools that we're going to share today? I don't know that I want them to be different, but I know that there are people in a situation that can use some of these tools. So again, if you're still awake, great. If not, hopefully, at least there's been some takeaways, and I hope you all have safe travels back home. But for those of you who are still conscious and still with me, we will move on to, again, the topic, inspiring conscious leadership. And in preparing for this, I do what most people would do. You say, all right, inspiration, I want that to be a theme. I know that ECC, your big conference there, is all about inspiration, right? Inspire, that's the theme. That's what's going to tie everything together. I think you guys are going to hear a little bit more about that before things wrap up. Inspiration, what is inspiration? So I look up that, okay, I work through that. And consciousness, what about consciousness? We talk about conscious leadership. What is consciousness? Well, again, there's some synonyms for that. You could talk about awareness. You could talk about knowing what's going on. But for me, the synonym that I use is Whitting. Whitting, company that I work for, Whitting Partners. It is not my last name. No association with the word Whitting, other than the fact that I, as a coach, help people who are unwittingly screwing up their careers, unwittingly limiting their odds of success, unwittingly damaging their teams. And so thereby, I spend all of my time on conscious leadership for those in the oil and gas industry. And so these words, very, very meaningful. But again, going back to that word inspiration, how many of you would be able to draw a distinction between the word inspiration and awareness? Inspiring awareness. Isn't that the same thing? Is that redundant? Again, rhetorical question, you don't have to answer. And obviously talking about the definitions of words and etymologies and stuff, not the best topic for after lunch, but nevertheless, it is interesting. If you dig into it, inspiring and awareness do have some distinctions. Awareness is basically the knowledge of something. You know something. You have some knowledge, you are aware. Whereas consciousness is basically a state of awareness. You're aware of all these different things, but it's in a much more philosophical way. It's a greater way. It's a more purposeful way. And I think this is best summed up by the cockpit here. I know at least when I get off a plane, you say hi to the pilot and you peek in there, and I say, wow, look at all those gizmos and gadgets. I would be totally overwhelmed if I went in there. But the reality is, if I went into the cockpit, I could probably become aware of a certain couple things, right? I'd probably figure out the altitude, probably figure out where the fuel gauge is, maybe the speed. I could be aware of all of those discrete things, but I wouldn't be conscious. If I was flying the plane, I would not have consciousness of the overall goal, which is, of course, helping passengers safely reach their destination. That would be a foreign concept to me. I would have, again, great awareness of a few finite things, but that's not consciousness. And again, I would hope that you want conscious pilots while you're flying, right? Well, you also want conscious leaders for yourself and for your organization. And so, again, I want you to have that distinction because many of us in this room, I would hazard to say all of us, are very good at understanding the finite pieces of the business, right? Project managers are in here. You guys are fully aware of timelines, budgets, supply chain challenges. You are aware of all those tiny things, and that's what makes you a great project manager, right? Or is it your ability to connect everything together to the big picture? Are you a conscious leader? Are you a conscious project manager? Or are you just going through the motions, go, not realizing how much energy and time and money you're wasting because you're so focused on all of those little gadgets and not realizing that you've flown 2,000 miles to the west when you're supposed to be going to the east? It's a common problem. I see it all the time. I'm sure you see it all the time. And today's goal is to help you avoid doing that. So again, some definitions here. You might agree, you might disagree. Again, maybe we're splitting hairs here. But the biggest takeaway, besides finding out that there is a distinction between inspiration and awareness, is that when I went to the source, the number one source that I use at least when I'm looking up definitions, when I went to that source, I scrolled down and there was a new word. And as far as the source that I use, you may use this too, Urban Dictionary. That is where I go for all of, all things important. You forget Webster's, definitions are changing these days. You want to go to Urban Dictionary. So maybe not at work, but Urban Dictionary. And when I went there and I scrolled down, I saw a new word that I'd never seen before, inspiraling. Inspiraling. And the definition there on Urban Dictionary was basically a combination of brainstorming and inspiration. And it's what happens in a typical brainstorming session where you spiral out of control. And it looks something like this. But Again, we got a lot of technical people in here, a lot of engineers. I can't just be up here, making up words. I almost came down here and spread fake news about the bridge counts in Pittsburgh and Houston and everything else. So there actually is a scientific version of an inspiral. I don't know if anybody knows what it is. I didn't know what it is. But basically, an inspiral is when you have two stars, two binary stars that are spiraling. Again, I don't know if they're sharing an orbit or whatever, but ultimately, they're coming in together, and eventually they're going to combine in some, chaotic moment, maybe, some beautiful moment, however you want to describe it. But again, it very much captures what can happen in an organization when you have lots of people who are aware of all of these discrete things, but they're not conscious. They're not conscious. And if you, as a leader, are allowing that to happen, if you're so focused on all of these discrete things and you're not taking the time to step back and connect them together, this is what's going to happen. You are going to have inspiraling. Everything's moving. These things are in orbit. They're moving along. They're clicking along. Everything is good. But it's not. It's not headed towards a world of consciousness. It's headed towards a world of chaos. So keep this in mind as we go along. Again, that's the warning to you. Another good stopping point if you do want to take a snooze. And again, thank you all for your time. But for those of you who are still with me, we will continue moving along. And moving along to, again, how. So how can we drive towards consciousness? Again, these concepts, I don't know that anybody would necessarily disagree with them, but who cares? We're a very practical group here. We just talked about that, right? So how do we get there? How do we get to a state of consciousness? How do we achieve long-term, sustainable success, whatever you want to call it? All of these flowery things that, again, can be sickening at times, quite frankly. If you're reading through leadership books or podcasts or whatever, they can be nauseating, but it's still a goal, right? You still want long-term success. You still want consciousness. You want all of these things. So how do you get there? And the way to get there is by embracing what I call a GPS mindset. A GPS mindset. And what is that? Well, a GPS mindset, for all of you, recognizes that you as leaders have your hands on the wheel. You are the driver. You have some measure of control. And it's up to you whether you want to turn left or right, you want to accelerate or decelerate. That's on you. You have control. But you want to recognize that the resources around you should be like a GPS. Because a GPS is great because it provides information. It could alert you if there's some cops up ahead, if there's a bridge out, for example. It can tell you all of these things, but it's still up to you to make a decision, right? Especially if you're driving in Houston, right? You come down here and you're following the GPS. You can't follow completely blindly because if you would, you'd probably wind up in an accident. You make a right-hand turn and then it's telling you to get over 5 lanes of traffic in about 50 yards. There's times where that's not going to happen. You need to use your judgment. And that's what you want. You want a GPS mindset. You're not going to follow something blindly. You have resources, good resources, that can predict the future, that can tell you what's going on, that can give you a best guess. But as a leader, you are still in control. And when you flip that, it's very much what we have going on here, the Future Leaders Program. When you start developing other people and developing other leaders, you want to switch roles. You want to make sure that they have their hands on the wheel. They have the power, again, turn left, right, accelerate, decelerate, change lanes. And you're there more as a GPS than anything. Kevin brought up the word mentorship. And again, there's mentorship, coaching, there's distinctions. We talk about that for a long time. But at the end of the day, this GPS resonates because you now, as a leader of leaders, you want to support them, and you're there offering observations. Hey, I'm observing that the speed limit here is 65 and you're going 70. And again, depending on what app you're using, or again, if you're actually still using something like this, well, we won't go there. This is... Don't want to date myself here, but anyway, so the moral of the story is this GPS mindset, if that's all you take away from this, again, that's how you want to be as a leader. You want to be as a resource, you have some suggestions, but at the end of the day, you recognize that sometimes you need to cede control to somebody else and make sure that they have responsibility and that you're there as a guide and as a resource. The other reason that this GPS mindset works is because of the letters, GPS, because they stand for something. They stand for grow, protect, sustain. GPS, grow, protect, sustain. And the idea here is, continuing on with the navigation analogies, is that as you're driving along and you're making decisions, at each step along the way, there's 3 simple questions you can ask yourself. And again, there's no shortage of methodologies that you can use, and again, leadership tricks and tools and mantras and everything else. And as Keisha said this morning, some things resonate with some people, some things don't. Some things will stick in your brain forever, and some things, you've probably already forgotten half of the things I've said. And that's okay. But what's nice is that each step along the way, if you're asking yourself, all right, how well am I doing at growing towards some destination? Am I actually making progress? It's a very simple question, but a very necessary one, especially when you're in the weeds. The second question, protect. What am I doing to protect the things that actually matter? And How might I be spending more time and energy than I need to protecting things that maybe don't matter, don't make a difference? I'm just doing it mindlessly. And then the third question is, what am I doing to ensure that the progress that I am making is sustainable? And again, I can go up here for 20 minutes more with forced driving and analogies, you get that, but you ask these questions and again, you're all intelligent enough, you all have enough experience to answer these, but you need to be asking them on a regular basis. So GPS. And even if you're not asking those specific questions, you can at least be asking these relatively juvenile questions. Why? So what? Says who? Again, you have these kids here, but it's a good representation. From a growth standpoint, why are you doing what you're doing? What is your ultimate destination? Why did you even get in the car to begin with? From a protection standpoint, hey, I've got my kid overprotected here. He's got a helmet, he's got his bubble wrap, he's good to go. But so what? Does it make a difference? Now again, the goal is to help ask those questions tactfully if you're in a leadership position, but they are important questions. And then the final one, says who? From a sustainability standpoint, how much time and energy are you spending on things that you say you should do? I should do this. Oh, I got to do this. Says who? It's a very disarming question, very powerful one. But it's one that you might not ask other people as much, and you certainly might not ask yourself. So again, very simple, almost juvenile questions that your kids might ask, but there's value in them. There's value. Because this leadership thing does not have to be complicated. But it does have to involve you asking questions. Again, Kevin hit the nail on the head. You got to ask these questions. What do you say about PhDs? You got to ask why 5 times, right? I agree wholeheartedly. But by and large, we don't do a great job of doing that. So with that being said, we'll step through each of these 3 segments of this GPS mindset: grow, protect, sustain. And we'll start here with growth, inspiring growth. And this picture here of the daffodil, this is not from my backyard in Pittsburgh a couple weeks ago, but again, as you might know, the daffodils came up, and then we got several inches of snow on top. But the daffodils, they do what they do, and they persevered, and they had a mission, they had a goal, they grew through that snow. Good for them. It's in their DNA, or whatever the botanical equivalent of DNA is. That's great. But we are not plants. What is our mission? What is our goal? And again, not a unique concept to say, what is your passion? What fuels you? Where do you want to be? We hear those questions all the time. But practically speaking, many of the people that I've worked with throughout my career, and quite frankly myself, when posed that question, we get into the weeds. Again, not to stereotype, I'm going to stereotype. A lot of the people here in this room are very good at getting into the weeds, right? So if you want to inspire growth in others, keep it really high level. Again, it might pain you. Might pain a former engineer, if I can call myself that, again, to not go out 6 decimal places, but keep it as high level as possible. And to help answer this question of where are you headed, where do you want to go, I have one suggestion for you. Ask yourself, what are the 4 or 5 key pillars, key themes, key objectives, key values, whatever you want to call them, 4 or 5, very high level, that are guiding you in your life. And there's probably some overlap between business and personal. Again, we talked about that, right? Keisha, there's a tremendous amount of overlap. We need to recognize that. But 4 or 5. And I did this exercise 2.5, 3 years ago when I transitioned again away from a more traditional role into this world of coaching. And I didn't have this framework at the time, but I wound up doing it with my wife. It was on a big piece of butcher paper that we hung on the wall, and we were going through it. Like, what are the big values here? And I'll tell you what, it was tremendous. I don't want to say it was life-changing necessarily, but 4 or 5 key values, which for us, we identified with family, faith, talk about community or country, the desire for education, search for truth, whatever you want to say. And then the 5th one, hard work ethic, the desire to continue doing things. Again, very, very, very high level. I imagine many of you in this room, if you had to pick 4 or 5, again, another invitation to just tune out the rest of the way. At least if you're thinking through these things, you might stay awake. So think through it, 4 or 5. What are 4 or 5 things for you? When I work with people, sometimes it's happiness, it's stability, it's things like that. But by and large, there's not an infinite number of these things. But when you have them, it becomes far easier to come back to a place of consciousness and connect the dots, connect what your day-to-day is. My decision to come down to Houston to speak. Someone would say, no brainer, it's great. Houston, again, you escape, we have some flurries there, still Sunday morning up in Pittsburgh, right? But it's bigger than that. I can spend 30 seconds saying, how does it align with, again, those 4 or 5 pillars of mine? Do that for yourself. Do that for the people you work with. It might not be on your normal performance appraisal or annual or biannual conversations that we have with people, but if you can get a sense of that from people, as generic as it sounds, and then help connect the day-to-day decisions back to that, that's inspirational, right? That's going to help them be able to focus and bring it back and say, again, with that first question in the GPS, how am I growing? How am I getting closer to my ultimate goal? Now, the opposite of that, what happens when you don't have that clarity? And when I'm working with people who are in career transition, and again, from what I've gathered so far, we got a lot of great sponsor companies. Everybody's happy to work for their company for the next at least 15, 20 years. You can use some of Kevin's tricks to network, but again, we're not talking about career transitions here necessarily, but one thing that comes across a lot in that is people who are, again, they don't have that high question. I mean, I'm surprised when I throw them off and I ask that, and it's, well, no, I have this definition. I want to make this much. I want to stay here. I want this title. I want all of these things. Start high level. We'll get there eventually. So that's how you can help other people. Because if you don't, you will be in spiraling growth. In spiraling growth. Again, the opposite, where you're aware of all these finite things that you want or you think you want, and you don't realize how in conflict they are. And we saw a great example of in spiraling growth when it comes to the energy industry. We're all familiar with what happened when the strategy for many companies was growth for growth's sake, right? Not sustainable, not necessarily a good thing. Yeah, check the boxes. That's what investors wanted. They wanted production growth, but clearly there was a downside to it. Why? How? How did that come about? Again, we're not going to go into the weeds there, but with the benefit of hindsight, you could say, well, what was or is, should be the opposite or the ultimate goal, I should say, of these companies? It's not short-term growth. It's not necessarily short-term stock performance. Again, depending on your perspective. But if they firmly believed true long-term value, is that what they would be doing? Again, we know maybe the answer to that. We're probably going to get some questions here about potential spiraling situations here as we move along, and there's clamoring for production growth. But the reality is that situations like that happen when you have overproduction, overgrowth, and the ramifications when you're not crystal clear about your ultimate goals. So again, that's that first question. What are you growing towards? Are you making progress towards that ultimate goal? And along those lines, again, you still want to answer the question of how. Okay, that's great. I've identified where I want to go, but how do I get there? And we'll talk about another buzzword, another I word here, not inspiration, not inspiralation. Again, if we're making up words, that's going to be the noun form. We'll run with that for now. But innovating growth. Again, another buzzword. I'm sure many of your companies have spent good amounts of money on innovation training. But what does that look like? Again, we're talking to you as leaders who are going to help other people grow, not just for yourself, but help other people grow, help challenge them. So how do you do that? Well, one, of course, it's nice to clarify what the ultimate goals are. That's a given. We've talked about that. But then as people come up with ideas, how do you help them move forward? How do you help them leverage them? And I'll give you one tip right now. Tip when it comes to innovation, there's a lot of ways to talk about innovation, but it's a question. It's a question I've heard a couple different times. I'll give credit to the first person I heard it from, Bob Eckert, newandimproved.com. I have no relationship with him. It was part of a training that he did years ago. But this question that he asked as far as innovation changed my life. And I think it probably could have changed the results of some of the bridges here that you guys were building. And that is when somebody has an idea, maybe a questionable idea, but an idea nonetheless, what's your first instinct? We'll assume it's a silly idea, at least your mind a stupid idea. What's your first instinct? How do you respond? Cool. Dismiss it? Yeah, most people, yeah. Yeah, okay, thanks. I'll park that, thank you. Maybe you could do it politely. You could do it very politely. Oh, or you can lie, because that's a great idea. But if you actually want to inspire growth, and you truly want what innovation is, because what is innovation? It's building upon what was done before, right? How you respond is, what I like about that idea is X. So again, somebody had an idea at the table, perhaps. You say, again, it wasn't a very good idea. We say, what I like about that idea is, if we stack 10 marshmallows high, it's going to stand out. And Lance is going to come over first, and he's going to see what we've done. Is there any other way we could do that? Whatever the case might be. What I like about that idea. It's a great way to keep things positive and recognize that not only can you build upon an idea, as silly and outrageous as it is, but if you're conscious of what the ultimate goals are, now you can pivot and bring it back so you don't go off down a tangent. Because you can say, what do I like about that idea, and then go down that path and then be totally in the weeds. But if as a leader, you're conscious of the goal, and you can politely recognize that even the silliest ideas have value, a simple statement like that can lead to true innovation. And when it comes to innovation, again, we're looking at a bridge. We're looking at the Brooklyn Bridge. Again, a great story of innovation. The Brooklyn Bridge, designed by John Roebling, who has Pittsburgh ties. He designed 2 bridges in Pittsburgh that were very much inspirational to the Brooklyn Bridge, which has been standing for, I think, about 140 years. So what's that, 90 more years than the Fern Hollow Bridge, which collapsed. So again, a testament to him building on what was done before. When the Brooklyn Bridge was commissioned, the big ceremony there was talking about how, again, it wasn't just John Roebling or a handful of people over a handful of years that did this. No, it was built upon generations, centuries. That's innovation. Probably a lot of stupid ideas that led to long-term sustainable results. The next category is inspiring protection, and true, authentic protection. And again, I'm already buttering myself up, I hope, for the Houston crowd here. But again, let's look to astronauts at NASA. And here is a big problem. Here's a big problem. NASA's great, space is great, but what do you see in this picture? You see a lot of protection, right? We're keeping these astronauts safe, but with a purpose. The goal is not just protection in and of itself. The goal is to protect an astronaut so that he or she can get into outer space, can complete the mission. But by and large, there's too many people today who have a false sense of what protection is. And my guess is, again, we'll go back to the career example, since nobody in here is looking to change careers, it's people that are looking to protect titles, protect salaries. Why? What are you looking to protect? When you're looking to protect things that might not matter or that used to matter, or again, we've got a lot of companies here with a lot of senior leadership who have been around for a while. And Jason said at the outset, right? Fluor has a lot of people who've been around for a while. Well, what happens there? People get protective. Again, you know this, you see this. But how do you call them out on it? Again, tactfully, for lack of a better term. Well, you recognize that sometimes protection can lead to inspiraling. When you're protecting things that don't matter, it can cost you. It could cost you time, money, energy, a whole lot of things that, again, you might not be able to afford. And while obviously, I'm not going to go down the road of talking about COVID, clearly we saw some of that, right? We saw some of that where people had in their mind, what they wanted to protect, but at what expense? And even when people were intellectually honest and said, hey, yes, there's trade-offs, the answer might be somewhere in the middle when it comes to, say, masks or something like that, what happened? People got politicized, polarized. They got into a camp. And it was almost like they wanted to protect their integrity by saying, no, this is what I believe, this is what I've always believed. Well, it's an unnecessary form of protection. It's counterintuitive. It could blind you, and it could lead to, of course, a lack of consciousness. And with that, I will say that we need to be careful about results. Again, we're all, I'm sure, results-oriented, results-driven, data-driven, all of these things. But when people have a false idea of what these metrics were, we're going to protect those metrics at all costs. And again, I see this in some other areas, diversity and inclusion. It's great. But when people get too caught up on these metrics and they're trying to protect what they put in place in these programs, and we said we're going to do this, and they lose sight of the fact that, again, we're not here to protect metrics. We're here to protect the goal of having a good, solid workforce, good culture. That's worth protecting, not some intermediary metrics. So keep that in mind, whether you're, again, doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you're in oil and gas, same thing, right? You have a well that comes online, screaming, huge production. Well, those results can be misleading. And so for the next wells that are drilled, and engineers, does the same thing, and they come in as clunkers, and management is like, well, this is where the bar was set, right? They're trying to protect this idea, but those wells might not come on as strong, but they might be the best producers. Again, analogy after analogy that you need to be on guard for. So again, the question here is, are you protecting things that actually matter? Or are you over-insuring things that, you can let go? Doesn't matter. Doesn't have an impact. Which brings us to the third leg of GPS, sustainability. And on this slide here, as all the other ones have, we have a picture. We have a picture of what I view sustainability as. And that is, I guess, either nothingness or altogether, because what is sustainability? How many definitions? I did not go to Urban Dictionary to define sustainability. Maybe I should have. But as you all know, sustainability is this vague term. And what does it mean? Well, for me, it means leadership sustainability, being able to continue towards your goals, doing it in a way that allows you to keep moving forward, to bring other people forward. That's sustainability. Obviously, from an environmental standpoint, we could talk about sustainability. We can go on forever. But what is sustainability? Well, depends. Depends on your view, your biases, where you sit, green energy, not so green energy, traditional energy. What is sustainability? Well, it all goes back to, of course, having what that ultimate goal is and being able to get there safely, securely, consistently. But when you have a false sense of sustainability, you can send people off course. And the number one thing that I see that leads to a false sense of sustainability is oversimplification, right? In this world of convenience and sound bites and Twitter or whatever it's going to be called here once Elon Musk takes over, in this world, we just want a quick answer, right? We want a simple answer. We don't want to complicate things. Again, with some exceptions in this room, of course, but by and large, we want a simple answer. But oversimplification leads people off course. And again, the best example actually comes from the world of climate change and sustainability. And for those of you who follow the likes of, say, Alex Epstein or others, you've probably heard similar comments about the fact that our ultimate goal should be human flourishing. Just like Keisha talked about, human flourishing, that is a noble goal. Much higher than stock prices and earnings and production results and all of these things. Human flourishing. That is what we should be striving for. But when you have an oversimplified view of things, you find yourself off course. And it happens all the time. So ask yourself in your day-to-day jobs, are you oversimplifying things? Do you not have the patience to take the time to talk and listen and become more conscious, as Kevin warned, right? Are you taking the time to talk to your people? Because if you're not, then you're going to very much mirror this quote here. One of my favorite quotes from the fellow sarcastic writer of, 100 years ago. And he said, there is always a well-known solution to every human problem. Neat, plausible, and wrong. So one of the final warnings for you today is be on guard against oversimplified views of anything. Sustainability, growth, diversity and inclusion, whatever it is. If it seems like it's oversimplified, there's a good chance it is. And if it is, what's going to happen? You're going to inspiral. That's inspiraling sustainability. When you get into these camps, you don't see eye to eye, you're butting heads because you've oversimplified things. So again, maybe a bit of a mixed message at times. Sometimes I'm telling you to go ahead and simplify and go at the highest level and figure out what your ultimate destinations are. Now I'm telling you that sometimes you need a little complexity. But understanding when to do A and when to do B, that's what a conscious leader is. Knowing you are on an sustainable path and at least asking the question, at least asking if you have oversimplified things. And if you can do all of these things or most of these things, the ultimate goal, the ultimate destination for you, whatever your goal is to be successful at it, right? You want to inspire success. So if you can help people ask these simple questions that we've asked today, whether it's about, again, how well are you doing growing and moving forward? Are you protecting what's worth protecting? And are you doing it in a sustainable manner? You can ask those three questions, or you can go back to the juvenile questions and just say, why? Why? Why are you doing that? Why? Says who? Why do you have to do that? Why do you have to turn in that report? Oh, my boss says so. Does he or she need it? No? Okay. And how come? How come? All these simple questions. That can help inspire success. And so with that, again, I thank you for listening, and I hope that this helps. I hope that this helps you guys become leaders like the Brooklyn Bridge we see here, standing 140 years later, thanks to the inspiration, the innovation of somebody like John Roebling, who we just looked at on that slide. Again, John Roebling died before the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge even began, or at least significant construction began. But clearly, he set the stage with his steel cables that, again, if you went and boiled your pasta today, you could have made some steel cables and suspension bridges. I think we were time limited there. But again, if you took the inspiration of somebody like John Roebling, you might have had greater success, you may have won, and you may have abided by Lance's rules that some people claim weren't quite as clear as they could have been. But they could have asked questions, right? So again, with that, I implore you to be more like the Brooklyn Bridge, more like John Roebling, and to, again, inspire those around you. And so with that, as we wrap up here, again, segue to the ECC big conference about inspiration. Hopefully this helps you recognize the ways in which you can inspire others. And again, thank you all for your time. And if any of this resonated in any way, shape, or form, you're welcome to go here, gpsforecc.com, where, again, we get into depth about some of these things. There's additional material. It all ties into this GPS thing. Again, all with the aim of helping you achieve long-term, sustainable success. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions you have. Again, we can go back. Oh, boy, there's already questions. All right. I think you might have popped up in the back there. Sir. When they're told they're a micromanager? Well, it's, quite frankly, I think in some cases it's fear, right? You've worked so hard. You built this foundation, and it's this false sense of protection, right? So, well, of course I'm protecting this. Why wouldn't I want to ensure this? I did this. I built this. I'm proud. And, I mean, can you fault me? Would you, when it comes to your children, right? Would it fault you if you spent a little extra time, money, energy to secure them, to buy the best car seat? People do that all the time. Why wouldn't you do that for your team, right? And again, it's unconscious. Whereas somebody says, how much more protection are you getting? And so again, I think it's coming from a place of good, right? They've built this, they've done this, they're proud of it, they don't want it to crumble, but they don't recognize, of course, how blindly they are to the fact that, well, they're not helping anybody else get to that point too. But in terms of why are they so sensitive? Well, it'd be the same thing. If I said, hey, you can go ahead for that $20 car seat. You don't need an $80 car seat for your kid. I'd be insulted. Why? I mean, I don't know. I love my kids. I want the best for them. So I think that's it. I think, again, not to be cliche, they don't see the big picture or whatever, but that's it. You spend a career, especially a manager, 10, 15 years in, I built that. I'm going to protect that. But they don't recognize the cost. So that's it. So that's how to help people. But again, it comes back to that innovation thing. If somebody's a micromanager, hey, I like that you're checking in and walking by my desk every 30 minutes. What I like about that is that I'm here, I know you're here, I know if you need me. But how might we replicate the fact that, yeah, I know how to get a hold of you, you know how to get a hold of me. How might we do that? So, I mean, again, that's how you can turn it around and not insult that person who is sensitive. To say, hey, look, I love that you're on email all day long, or like, Keisha mentioned somebody's sending emails at Sunday morning. I love the fact that you are finding windows that work for you. How might you do that in a way that doesn't make me feel like I, too, need to use my Sunday morning? So thank you for that question. Any other?
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
Well,
of course, it depends how you look at it. The official number that the official wrong number that most people use is on the order of 450. Do you remember the number? So it's about 450 bridges. Now, again, I think if I was defending Pittsburgh today, which, again, I don't know if I have a big enough contingent here to go ahead and go down that path. Clearly, Pittsburghers would say, well, our bridges are actually like, connecting two mountains together, whereas if you come to Houston where there's 2,300 bridges, most of them you don't even realize you're driving on, right? They're overpasses, they're all these things. So again, however you want to measure it, if you want to come out the winner, you can. But it's about 400 and something. I think for reference, it's by that metric, New York City has 700 something. Hamburg, Germany is on the order of 2,300. But again, for all intents and purposes, we're going to say that Houston has more bridges than anywhere in the world, including Hamburg, Germany. So good question, though. Thank you. Any other questions about this? Career? Was that a hand?
Yeah, kind of handing up, but the kind of the protecting what matters aspect of it. So this is more kind of an advice. A lot of us work for people above us. So the metric protection really rang true with me. That you have a lot of supervisors that we work for that put a lot of value in protecting the metrics. So do you have any advice around how do you convince, or how do you share up that may not be the right tool or the right thing that you're trying to protect as looking up the hill?
Yeah, sure. I think, and I've seen this. I've seen this actually in my former career, and it's a bit of a reverse engineering, where you are defining, and somebody should have them defined, the highest level goals. And again, I'm not talking about mission statements, which can flow by the wayside, but again, those upper level executives, they know what those top level goals are. So how can you map that out? And it seems so overly simplistic. I think we did it in Power BI, but we took everybody's objectives in the company, and we just showed, department level and rolling it on down to see how they're connected. And then inevitably, you find numbers that they're not connected. So like anything else, if you can show them, and it's visual, it's funny. Again, you're going back and forth. I like numbers, like Jason said this morning, like slides with numbers. I don't think I have any slides with numbers, but again, used to be an engineer. Now I can just talk about fluffy leadership stuff all day. But the reality is, if you could see it visually, we saw the colors. I say, hey, here it is. It's all grouped together, and then, hey, there's this bucket over here, which, again, you could tactfully say, I'm having difficulties. It doesn't seem to be quite as aligned. Do we want to invest as much time on this as possible? So it's a good way to see the stuff that, again, might not matter. And more importantly, it's a good way to see things that might lead to inspiraling or inspiralation, or however you want to see, where obviously there's conflicts. Because it's cliche. We talk about silos, and we have objectives, and how many, again, departments have conflicting metrics. But how often are people visualizing those? Or do you just rush through the planning season, you rush through your objectives, you get those things, and then you're done? Can you set aside somebody's time, an intern, to just say, hey, here's all these things. Can you try to group them, and I'll help you and map them out? So that is one solution that has worked and has been eye-opening to people, and has led to saying, yeah, you know what, you're right. That's not a value add. So thank you. Good question. Yes?
Would you differentiate between a conscious leader and a self-aware leader? Would you say that there's a difference between the two? Because it can be argued that leadership that is not conscious are also leaders that are less self-aware?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's overlap in definitions. I might want to consult Urban Dictionary before putting myself out there and really committing to an answer. But by and large, again, I would imagine you have had leaders, you have had managers that are not very self-aware, but have been, managed to get the big picture and get the job done. And so I would argue that, yes, they have a level of consciousness, even if their self-awareness is not there. Now, in an ideal scenario, obviously, the more self-aware you are, the better it is. But it doesn't have to start there. Again, you can go back to reverse engineering. You could have no clue about yourself and how you're harming people, but I could be a great leader if I'm all focused on you. What do you need? I'm going to figure out what you need. And again, I might be a jerk. I might be self-limiting. Maybe by doing that, maybe I'm over-investing in you as an employee. Maybe I'm not conscious to the fact that, again, I'll put it bluntly, people are going to say, you're not worth investing in. It's pretty harsh. Could be true. But maybe I'm the type of leader who has, no good self-awareness for judging people. Maybe that's where I'm lacking. But I do know that I want to help people. That's my number one pillar, right? Forget everything else I talked about, family and country. No, my number one pillar is to help people. I'm going to do that no matter what. That's my ultimate destination. I'm going to do it. And if it's self-limiting for me, if I have limited self-awareness about what that's doing, then so be it. So again, long-winded answer. Clearly there's overlap, but I think you can draw distinctions. And I think it's a fun exercise, right? When you have words like this at times. Again, maybe there's a networking idea. We could do break out the dictionaries if you could still find a dictionary and do something like that. But again, the meanings of words, the etymologies of words, even the word inspiration, right? It's a great time to be talking about inspiration. Where does the word inspiration come from? It means to breathe. And as best as I could tell, most of you are actually still breathing here. So again, there's consciousness. I'm happy to see that. But inspiration, to breathe, is very, very biblical, right? Breathing new life into things, breathing new life into ideas, innovating, all of these things. And so to talk about inspiration, going back to its origins, here, again, Holy Week, right? Holy Thursday. Let's talk about breathing life into the things. These biblical things. Passover starts tomorrow night. All of these things, they have a very high-level meaning, high-level purpose. You talk about consciousness, awareness. You can talk about all these things. Again, we already had enough references to pastors and theology and everything else, but it's true. Start at the highest level. That's consciousness. Not living down here. Not living in the world of middle management without understanding how things are flowing up or down, but always being able to connect yourself, like a bridge, to the ultimate objectives, personal, professional, and in many cases, where they overlap. So again, I encourage you to take this approach when you're communicating with your peers, stakeholders, family. All of these things are equally relevant in your family. I can tell you how many times I have used what I like about that idea with my spouse, right? You're going to do this for dinner. What I like about that idea. We're going to go on vacation here. What I like about that idea. And then you build off of that. And again, she turns it on me. But it's a valuable, valuable tool. And it's a fun exercise. Again, talk about an innovation exercise. And it's fun to come up with, even the craziest solutions. Keisha this morning, right? That's what I thought of when she said, hey, you got a guy, lost his job. He goes to his wife, says, hey, what are we going to do? The wife says, well, I think we need to get rid of these kids. You could laugh at her, or you could say, what I like about that idea is it would be quiet if we got rid of the kids, and I can spend more time figuring out what I want to do with the rest of my life and get back on my feet. And you might say, well, we're not going to get rid of the kids, but that time is so precious to have that quiet. Maybe we actually do the crazy thing. Even though finances are tight, we're going to overinvest in childcare. We're going to go hire a nanny, and we're going to buy that silence. What I like about that idea is that it's going to give me the quiet. And so a sarcastic idea like that, if you bring it back to the ultimate purpose and don't allow yourself to spiral, if you will, can lead to pretty tremendous results that, again, are aligned with the ultimate purpose. So, any other questions, comments, statistics to challenge me? Anybody Googling along and willing to challenge all of my bridge stats? And if we do need to revisit that exercise, given the fact that there are different ways to measure bridges and spans and what counts and doesn't count, I took some video of some bridges that I think might have been in the running based on the official NTSB definition of what a bridge is. But, so any other questions about that or anything? All right, well, if there are no questions, again, I will say thanks again to everyone for, again, I'd be nodding off if this was the case. So hopefully that's a sign of, something. But with that, appreciate your time, appreciate your energy, appreciate the questions, and look forward to coming back to Houston again, the city of not so pretty bridges. So.